Hey everyone, and welcome to the video. In this video, we'll learn about Gitcoin Passport, what it is, why it's useful, and how to integrate it into a simple sample application. So let's get started. What is Gitcoin Passport? It's a decentralized identity record where you can collect stamps that show you have access to certain accounts, such as Twitter, Facebook, Google, ENS, etc. So what it looks like is some JSON, and this JSON has a stamps array, and inside of that stamps array are various objects that correspond to one of those providers that I mentioned before, and that object also has data that verifies that you own the account that it says you own. So how is that useful? Well, applications can load passports from an Ethereum address, they can verify it, and then they can calculate a score based off which stamps that passport has. The app can then use that score to determine what rights a user will have when interacting with the app. So for example, Gitcoin uses passports to determine what level of quadratic matching a user receives. Users with a higher score will receive more matching, 150% matching, while users with a lower score will receive less matching, only 50% matching. What is some of the tech behind it? Gitcoin Passport is powered by the Ceramic Network. The Ceramic Network is a decentralized data storage network, and Gitcoin Passport takes advantage of this. They use their DID data store for decentralized identity. Now, this is great because it's decentralized and it gives the user control over their identity data. You can learn more about the Ceramic Network by going to their website and reading their docs. So now that we know a little bit about Gitcoin Passport and why it's useful, let's build a small sample application that will teach us the basics of loading a passport, verifying a passport, scoring a passport, and then using that score to gate special content from certain users. This will give you a foundation, and you can use this to build off of when you're integrating Gitcoin Passport into your future applications. So let's get started. All right, so before we get into building the app, I want to show you a quick preview. It's called Passport Checker, and what it does is it just loads a passport and checks if the score is above a certain number, and if it is, it shows a special string. If it's not, it shows this "sorry, score is too low" string. So this wallet that I'm logged into right now, it doesn't have a passport, so it's saying the score is too low. But if I switch to a different wallet that does have a passport, we can check and we can see that I have enough points to see the special string. So I'll switch to that and reload the page, and we can see that it says you have a high enough score to enter. So this is not very exciting, but in your app it could be some special gated content that only users which have a high enough score can see. So that's the app. We're going to be building it together, but if you ever need to see what the finished product looks like, or you ever get stuck, you can come to this repo right here. I'll put a link to it in the description, and this is the fully completed app with all the code you need, so you can compare your code with this code and figure out what your problem is. So that being said, let's go back to an empty directory and start from scratch building this Passport Checker app. We are going to be using something called Rainbow Kit, which is a great library that has some wallet connection and React hooks pre-built into it. And it's really easy to set up. All you have to do is run this command and it will set up an app with Rainbow Kit, WagMe, which is just a package of React hooks, and Next.js, which is a really nice React framework. So you can use whatever package manager you prefer. I'm gonna use npm, so we can just copy this right here and then go into a terminal and cd into whatever directory you want to cd into, and then just run this command and it will create a new Rainbow Kit app. So we can select the name. I'm going to call it Passport Checker 2, and then it will install all the dependencies. Okay, once it's done installing the dependencies, we can just cd into that new directory that it created and then open it in your favorite code editor. So once we're inside, we can open up a terminal and then run yarn dev, and this will start up the development server. And then if we go to localhost 3000, we can see the standard Rainbow Kit app with all the boilerplate that they have set up for you. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to open up this pages directory and open up the index.typescript and then delete pretty much everything except for the connect button from this main container. So we'll scroll all the way down to the end of here and delete all of that. And then in the head, we can change this to, say, passport checker. Okay, and we'll also delete the footer here because we don't need that. We'll save that, go back to the browser, and it should have automatically refreshed with just the connect button up here for connecting to a different network and connecting a different wallet address. So we don't actually need all the different networks, so we can come in here and we can delete. So we can come in the app.typescript file and delete all of these chains except for mainnet. So we can go ahead and delete that and then come back, and it should no longer have that chain selector on the left. Because right now, Passport, you can send all of your queries through mainnet, and depending on if you're connected to the Ceramic testnet or Ceramic mainnet, the data will be stored in a different location, but all the requests go through the Ethereum mainnet, which is totally fine because you only have to sign messages, so it doesn't cost any gas. So it's fine to go through mainnet for that. Cool. So now that we have everything removed that we don't need, we can go ahead and start adding some stuff. Okay, so now that we have everything removed that we don't need, we can start adding some stuff that we'll need to use. So first thing we want to do is RainbowKit has already been set up for us, and you can see that we are connecting right here to an Ethereum address, but now we need to get access to that address. So how you can do that is with WAGMI hooks. So all we have to do is import use account from WAGMI. So once we have this hook imported, we can just use it right inside the component. So I can say const data equals use account. Okay, and this will just load our account data into the component. So once we have this data, we can call data.address, and that will give us the Ethereum address that we need. Great. So now that we have access to the data for our account, we then need to import some hooks from React. So let's import the use effect and use state hooks. And we'll just use these to store a few things in state and then to call some methods in use effect. So we'll say use effect, and then we'll pass in a function, and then we'll tell this effect to only run when that data changes. At this point, we have all the data that we need to query for a passport, but we need a method to query the Ceramic network for that passport. So lucky for us, Gitcoin Passport has an SDK, which has a bunch of packages that are really useful. So we're going to be using this reader passport, verifier, and scorer packages. So first off, we need to query the passport or read the passport from the Ceramic network. So we'll go ahead and click on that, and that will take us into this reader package. And then it has some instructions on how to install that right here. So we can just copy that, go back into our code editor, open up a new terminal, paste that, and that will add the SDK reader. Once that's done installing, we can basically just import it and use it. So we will import passport reader from at gitcoinco/passport SDK reader. And once we have access to that, we can just create a new reader. So we can say const reader equals new passport reader. And we're going to be using the Ceramic testnet, so we can do https://ceramic-clay.3boxlabs.com, and then we'll pass in 1 for the network, which is the Ethereum mainnet. So we'll save that. So now down here in our use effect, we can actually use this reader. So we're going to be using a bunch of asynchronous calls, so we want to wrap some of this in an async function. So we can make a function right here that's async, and we'll just call this get data, and then we'll call that immediately below its definition, And this is just so we can use the nice await syntax and we don't have to have a bunch of callbacks .thens chained onto a lot of our method calls. So we can say const passport equals await reader .get passport. And then here, all we have to do is pass in the address of the account which owns the passport. So in this case, we know that we already have the account data right here saved in this data variable, so we can just do data.address. Cool. So let's go ahead and just console.log out the passport just to see what it looks like. And this is just a TypeScript error here saying that this data and address can possibly be undefined. We're just gonna get around that by adding some exclamation marks at the end right here, just to make sure that these aren't, just to tell TypeScript that these aren't ever gonna be null. So at this point, we can go back to our browser and reload the page and open up the inspect developer console, and we should be seeing these passport objects being print out. So every time we reload the page, it should print out these passport objects. So basically, a passport, if we look inside it, has an expiry date, an issuance date, and a couple of stamps. You can see my passport currently has two stamps. One is from ENS and one is from Twitter. So how I got those is I went to the Gitcoin Passport's testnet website and I logged in with my account, and then I clicked on connect account on Twitter and connect account on ENS, and I signed a message and I verified that I have ownership over those two accounts. And then after I did that, my passport came back with two stamps. So your passport at this point will probably be an empty array. So you should go ahead and do that now so that you'll have some sample passports that you can test with when we go to verify and score a passport. So go ahead and do that now. Go to testnet.passport.gitcoin.co, log in with your address, and then just connect a couple of accounts. Whatever accounts you have, you can just go ahead and connect a couple of them and then come back, reload the app, and this time when the passport loads, you should see those stamps inside of this array. Great, so at this point I'm going to assume you have at least one stamp in this array, and we're going to move on to the next step, which is verifying a passport. So we need to verify that this passport looks good and everything is following the rules of the passport and everything has been verified correctly. So Gitcoin has another package called the verifier, which can do all of this for us. So if we go back to the Gitcoin Passport SDK GitHub page and then come down to the SDK verifier, click on that package, we can just install that just like we did with the reader. So we'll copy this, go back to our terminal and open up the one that's not running the server and then just paste that in. So this will just import or this will install the SDK verifier, and then we can go ahead and select 0.1.1 for that verifier. And as soon as it's done, we can just import it up here. Now, this gets a little hairy, and I'm not sure if this is the best way for this to work, but this is how I got it to work, and I was running into a couple of issues. So please let me know in the comments if you have a better way to get this to work. But let's go ahead and see what happens if we just try to import this just like we did the passport reader. So if we do import passport verifier from @gitcoin.co/passport/SDK/verifier, if we import the passport verifier just like we did the reader, and then if we try to instantiate it, we're going to get an error. So let's go ahead and just demonstrate that real quick. So if I come here and I just say const verifier equals new passport verifier, and then what the passport verifier takes in, and then the passport verifier doesn't take in anything. So we can just save it just like that. So if I were to do this on this line, this is the line that actually causes the error. So if we come back, we can see that it says WebAssembly, the module is not flagged as WebAssembly module. Since Webpack 5, WebAssembly is not enabled by default and flagged as experimental. So this is a Webpack error. with loading these WebAssembly modules. And the way we can get around this is by adding this experiments.async WebAssembly equals true into our WebAssembly config. So how to do that in Next is if you come into the next.config.js, you can basically pass into this config file a Webpack property, and then you can set different attributes on the Webpack configuration. So what it looks like is you just say Webpack as the key right here, and then you pass in a function, and this function takes a couple of things, but we really just need the config, but I'll show you what the other things are as well. So you have the build ID, whether it's in a dev environment or not, whether it's on this being rendered on the server, some of the default loaders, and then Webpack. Okay, so we'll pass in that function as the value of the Webpack key, and then inside of this function, all we have to do is turn on that async WebAssembly as part of the experimental feature. So we can do config.experiments.async WebAssembly equals true. And then we can say return config. And this should help us with our error. So we'll come back and we'll restart the server right here. Cool, so we'll restart our server, and then we'll refresh the page, and it still won't work. So we still have to do one thing after enabling that async WebAssembly. So now we're getting a different error. It's saying that this Spruce ID module is not found. So when this was being loaded, it basically couldn't find this Spruce ID WebAssembly module. So in order to get around this error, we now have to import the verifier in a slightly different format than we're doing before. We basically have to do it async. So the way to do it async is by just, we can delete this, but keep that import path. So we can say import, and then we'll just chain a dot then at the end. And then we'll call it VER, so that's our verifier. And then what we need to do is basically instantiate our verifier. So what we can do is we can say let verifier, and that will just be empty for a second. And then we'll come back here and say, as soon as this package is loaded, then we can just set this verifier equal to a new verifier. Just like that. So this is kind of funky. It's just async importing of a module. But yeah, that gets us past the error. So we can come back and we can refresh the page, and we can see that so I forgot to delete this, so you can delete that because we don't need that anymore, and save it, and then come back, and our page will now be loading. So now we have access to this verifier variable right here, so we can use that in our use effect. So if we come back down here and we say await verifier.verify passport, and then what we need to do is just pass in the address again. So we'll do data !address !, and then we'll pass in the passport that we loaded above. So we can save what gets returned from there as verified, and then we'll console.log that out, and we'll add a little tag just so we can keep track of what objects are what. So we'll say verified, and then in this upper one we can say passport, just so we can keep track of what object is what, just like that. Okay, cool. So once we have that, we can go back to our front end and reload the page, and we can see this verified object getting printed out as well as the passport. So if we look at this verified object, we can see that it now has this verified true property that it didn't have before. And so what this means is the verifier just went through each of these stamps and checked the credential data and made sure that it looked good, and then it appended one of these verified true stamps. So in your app, after you verified the passport, you can go through all the stamps and make sure that they're all true. Cool, so now that we've verified that the stamps are correct, the final thing is to score the passport. So there's another package from the SDK that we can use to score a passport. So let's go ahead and open that up. Go back to the main SDK and then click on this Passport SDK Scorer. So this scorer right here, all we have to do is install it. So we'll come back, open up the terminal, paste that in, and install it. And then we'll do 0.1.1 and wait for that to install. You can do 0.1.1 for that second query as well. We'll clear out our terminal. And now all we have to do is import this. So we'll have to import this with the same syntax that we used for the verifier, just because we're going to run into the same problem that the verifier ran into. So we'll say scorer, and then we'll basically just import that the same way we did with the verifier. So we'll do import, and then at Gitcoin co/passport SDK/scorer. And then we'll chain on a dot then, and do scorer equals scorer, just like that. We can come down here and we can instantiate a scorer. So we can say const scorer I equals new scorer, new scorer dot passport scorer. So what this takes in is an array, and inside that array you can pass multiple objects, and each object needs to adhere to a specific schema. So it has to have a provider, and these providers can be any of the supported providers. So that's Twitter, Google, Facebook, etc. You can see that on the website, Gitcoin Passport website. So it can be any of these supported providers. So we can do ENS for now. So we'll do ENS. And then it has to have an issuer. So you can get this issuer from the credentials. So if you look inside of your passport right here and open up your stamps and then go to this credentials object, you can find the verifier right there. So just copy that and paste it in as the issuer. And then you can say what score you're going to give it. So this is to say, if somebody's passport has this ENS provider and it's been issued by the correct issuer, we'll basically give them a score of 0.5. Okay, now we can add as many of these as we want, and so we'll add another one for Twitter. So we'll go ahead and copy that object and then just change this to Twitter, and we'll also give people 0.5 points for being verified with Twitter. And then let's just do one more. So let's just do Google. All right, so as soon as we have this scorer instantiated, we also need to pass in a ceramic URL. So we can pass in this URL right here. I'm just copying it, but it's for the ceramic testnet node that's run by Gitcoin. So you can paste that right there, and then we'll paste the Ethereum network ID, which is the main net, which is ID number 1. Cool. So once that's all set up, we can now score the passport. So we can say const score equals await scorer I dot get score, and then we just have to pass in the address again and the passport, and then we'll console.log out the score. All right, now if we go back to our browser and refresh the page, we should see the score being printed out along with the passport data. So we can see score of 1 because my passport has 2 stamps, one from ENS and one from Twitter. So I'm getting 0.5 points for each of those. And then I don't have Google, so I'm not getting another 0.5 points. So my total is 1 point. Cool. So now we have everything we need, and now we can use this information to gate some content and only show it to people who have a high enough score. So let's go ahead and use our use state hook from React. So we can say const score and then set score equals use state, and we'll pass in 0 as the initial state. Down here, we can set the score equal to whatever score was calculated right here on line 42. And now we can use this score in our JSX down here. So right below the connect button, we can open up a ternary statement, and we can basically just check what the score is. So we can say score greater than or equal to 1, Now, if that's the case, we want to show a special string. So I'm just going to put it in a div right here, and I'll say you have a high enough score. Otherwise, they don't have a high enough score, so we can just say score not high enough, and then we can save that. So now if we come back to our passport checker and we refresh the page, we can see that it says score not high enough for just a second while it's loading the passport. As soon as it's loaded the passport, it then changes to you have a high enough score. If I switch my MetaMask to a different account that doesn't have a high enough score, and then I refresh the page, we can see that it says score not high enough, and then the passport and all of the other, the verified passport, they're all coming back as false because this address doesn't have a passport initialized, and so the score is 0. So I'm not getting that special string. If we want to see it once again, I can switch back to the account that has a passport, and it will automatically refresh with the new score, and it will say I have a high enough score right here because I have 2 stamps. All right, so I hope this was informative, and I hope it gave you a foundation that you can build off of in your own apps. So from this point, you can just make a lot more complex logic around which passport stamps you want to check for, what scoring you want to give each provider, and then you can use the total score at the end to, do whatever you want with. It could be an entirely different website that the user would have access to if they have a high enough score. It could be special discounts that you could give the user if they have a high enough score, anything. So it's totally up to you, but I think this gives you a good enough foundation where you can get started and then start really building something cool with the Gitcoin Passport. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment or contact me on Twitter, and I'll do my best to help you out. And yeah, thanks very much for watching, and I hope you have fun building with Gitcoin Passport.